I was born in 1960. I'm 62 years old. But I recently attended a community college, two different community colleges, um, for my associate degree late in life because I'm deaf. One of my classmates at the community college in Pittsburgh was also an older man who was a Vietnam veteran suffering from Agent Orange exposure. My teachers made me aware that many of the students, most of the students, were from a different generation and would have trouble understanding the ideas that me and this older gentleman found easy to understand. In fact, he got mad at some of the things that were being belabored because he said it made him feel like he was in kindergarten. I have a Twitter account mostly for climate change information, in which I was asked, what would you say to somebody who was younger who they probably wouldn't understand and how, that you felt was important for them to understand? Well, the point is, I thought I'd make a tape. Many people realize my complaints. I'm deaf. I was deliberately disabled as a child from the US government, and they've continued to torture me. I've developed Parkinson's disease from a terrible malpractice crime. I live below the poverty line. Also, the issues that I discuss and the evidence that I have developed are manifestly and obviously important, and yet virtually nobody does any of the homework that's necessary to understand it. It should be being analyzed, it should be being evaluated. One of the things that's most obvious is that all of the code breakers in the US Armed Forces went to sleep and just decided not to pay any attention to what was really going on. Well, I thought I'd make a tape for peer review. I can't recapitulate all of the evidence, but what I can do is discuss why it has been so important to me that I have a long blog and a number of YouTube videos and draw some conclusions about what's happening in 2023 from the perspective of somebody who was born in 1960, how our society has changed and how it has remained consistent. We live right now in what's known as a forcing house. Last time I used that term, somebody said, what does that mean? I started to think maybe it was because of the context in which I saw that term, that I knew what it meant the minute I heard it. What this book is on Special Armed Forces edition of Herbert Agar's publication from 1942. He says that the barbarianism of Europe has created a forcing house where we have to engage in high principles or none. We have to decide whether we're going to defend the innocent or we're going to eke out measly lives as appeasers to the criminally insane going on around us. JFK used that as his slogan in 1960. A Time for Greatness is a fantastic polemic. It's my favorite book. But the forcing house we live in is a climate change era forcing house by people who played fast, loose, and profligate with fossil fuels, full knowing this would happen. In the 70s, when they sent me what I call the Texas School Book, because that's what it is, it's also glasnost paper. They put out a song called Flame Over Africa. They deliberately violated the Environmental Modification Treaty. And what they're doing is building an ark, and they're committing acts of genocide. Now, the reason why you get mobbed, I'm surrounded in Tacoma, Seattle, and Pittsburgh by people from the grassroots movement who mob me with hostility as, petty pornographers is what they are. running a snuff film operation. It's the lowest thing that the civil rights movement has ever come up with. They're running a snuff film. They've killed some bystanders and they've targeted me. And they claim that it's their licky chops. They get the spoils. It's their divine ownership of an idea. And the idea is a strange thing because all of us really feel the same way about the basic idea of equity. So let's take you back to the 60s. When Martin Luther King was leading marches for peace and for civil rights, he wasn't just a black leader who people backing some horses put up some money on because he was black. He believed in morality. He believed that equity between people could come from public education and knowledge. Now, we started bombing Vietnam in what was a war of genocide. We just wanted to wipe people out. And the reason that we gave was also based on the idea of equity, but it was a distorted value code. It was based on the idea that there was a status quo that had a standard of living. Nobody asked the Vietnamese poor if they enjoyed their lives as Buddhists in the Mekong Delta. They said, do you have a fast car? Okay, so the idea of a standard of living was in harmony with the earth based on Buddhism was demolished to make way for the arms race, the Ford Motor Company, and the ideals of American hysterics. And we engaged in war of genocide on the argument that the basic standard of living had to be improved for the survivors, and that America's model was the oligarchy, that operates behind the scenes of the Democratic and Republican parties, and even around Russia, they leapfrog across all nation state lines. And the European Union shot America in the brain. They took out Kennedy, they took out King, and they uploaded the strange idea of colors, an equity system based on, when they released AIDS, they were basing it on Jonas Salk's survival of the wisest. And so, Harvard Medical's support for people who have healthy sex coupling is somehow wrong and needs to be burned alive in holy war. You will burn away your sins is the notion that comes from the Russian Orthodox Church. It tells people who die, then their cause will be cleansed of evil. So I'm sorry my coffee is percolating loudly, but I have to call attention to the fact that COVID was an example of their equity system. Everybody's going to be affected, even the man who monsters. Even everybody's going to be affected. Okay, so we have Marshall Smith's treatment of me as a symbol, you see, and that's the licky chop. The other side of the Aztec wheel is that we get burned on the white horse, and this is the psychology. It's the reason why when you try to wake people up and explain to them the evidence that shows that America's brain was removed. They took Kennedy out, they took Bobby Kennedy out, and as a gratuity, they even took out Circe Kennedy as an announcement of the triumph of the one bridge of George Takei and Richard and King Thorles. Their idea is the European Union that's based on an arc of equity, because the alternative would be to learn about each other, to have a standard of living that was in cooperation with the earth, to have a decent code of ethics in the way that we treat each other, and to mind each other's business, not build, the peep shows that we've built, where people look in on each other's houses, and there's all of this domestic terror. I mean, a snuff film is an outrage. Poisoning a poet to give them Parkinson's? Whose maniacal idea is that? I mean, it comes from Seattle. And Pittsburgh, UW Dialectical had a dude whose entourage included somebody who explained to me from Vietnam how they think about it. They say, we bring meaning to the world. Okay. This is not the idea of intelligent design. The idea of intelligent design is that the earth is structured to have climate balance, that it can be made prosperous by learning, that we can have public schools and education, things like the Hull House in Chicago, Tolstoy's ideas of public education. And we don't have to gang up behind demagogues and their personality cults in wars of genocide, that we can understand each other and come to a safety net, a global safety net that lives in balance with the earth while we learn about each other. And we teach certain things that are considered to be common sense, like waiting to get married, to have sex and have children. And what the alternative is, which is just normal sex education. I mean, people are people. Rather than talk about it, we've unleashed sabotage and done let these people wriggle their nostrils. They, what they did to me experimentally was sexual sabotage. It was attacks. They used nerve agents on me, and then they had this dude from Catholic Worker with friends from Hollywood going, "Oh, we committed sexual sabotage to prove we were ethical people. We believed in the spirit of love, that we are musicians." Meanwhile, they're shooting our leadership, removing the brain of our leadership, and installationing a Hollywood double cross across the lines where we're supposed to worship their oligarchs, the people with big money bags who created a forcing house. And they have a celebrity superstate that has representatives of our favorite status quo type. That one looks like a white, but that white has no count. So what we do is we get a bimbo, and she represents the bimbo. So we have one bimbo in New York. We have one holy man from the Russian Orthodox Church in New York. We have a black man who is squeaky clean in New York, and he's a drone warrior to boot. And this is Bush's mentality. It's obviously the way that he connived at things. He put on his little spinner and said, "Oh, well, we killed Kennedy, yes, but we put Obama in. We installationed Obama as a corporate art statement. Isn't that what JFK would have wanted?" See, and the spinner starts to spin. That people go, "Yes, that's a form of Swami Nostra." And it's a forcing house because they've heated up the planet. They're saying, if you want to make some of it, choose a side between the two sides that knew, because they're not doing anything about it. You can look at my evidence. People will say, "So what?" What do you mean, so what? The evidence is extremely serious. And they have a meat grinder agreement. There's a meat grinder. You go on the battlefield and get ground up in the name of one or the other. They're both representing the same deal. So, because they say that there's not enough now, there's not too scarce, and there's going to be even less. So they're practicing for their water wars. Now, the alternative to this is in place institutionally. It comes down to basic philosophy of rights law, civil and human address of medical health issues by the government, cut back in ridiculous spending. I mean, I'd stand with AOC on that one. And the UN's principles of sustainable development. There's a great hero, a really great hero. His name's Jeffrey Sachs, Sachs, in charge of sustainable development at the United Nations. That's where we belong. He was a diplomat with Russia who knows how to be diplomatic to both sides. That's the direction we should be going. And we should be cutting back from this forcing house that they're murdering activists trying to protect the planet. And it does, despite the wheels of the colors abomination. Okay, my father was a human rights activist. I have never treated anybody I didn't know other than on the basis of innocent person who, if they want my attention, I do my best to understand them. I am deaf, but I go about my business and I interact with people across ages and races all the time. It's true I get abused by mental cases who come running at me with their um, attempts to tape some proof of character defect, but I'm not exactly a perfect person. I have brain damage, for example, from having been tortured. But if you, I'm not in politics. I'm in poetry and the arts, and I'm a student. But despite the cosmic craziness of Yoko Ono's sacred shrink of media hypnosis that has potboiled this nightmare. Despite all of that, there are things in place that still make sense. The people who are involved in the Clubhouse movement have been criminal towards me. They poisoned me in the mouth, and they seem to be thieves, crazy with the snuff film idea. And I believe Yoko Ono is manipulating and bribing the Clubhouse movement. But it is one of the recovery programs where they should be required to do better and may do quite well when I stand back and I'm not around. People are using Vince Irene in Pittsburgh, Gretchen Hawkins in Seattle are using my presence as an excuse to be noxious. I'm not so sure um, about my grounds to knock Gretchen herself personally. I don't really know, but Steve Tangney at Sound Mental Health was one of the people who poisoned me in my mouth and refused to go get a doctor. You know, there's and Gretchen Hawkins encourages that Sound Mental Health to come to the Clubhouse program, despite my testimony and attempts to warn them not to. The message is the only person who's in danger from them is you. So there, I'm in danger because I'm the odd man out in the colors equity concept of genocide warfare, a status quo of people who go along with the oligarch age that they want to issue in. God help us all. So what we need to do is investigate the principle that there's actually two ideas of equity colors. One is everybody being re- required to pay into a safety net that affects everybody. That everybody has access to a safety net and emergency services, which is all being strained because of the other color system, which is the idea that they build an ark and have a genocide of status quo removal so that the quality of life of the survivors of the ark comes from the one bridge, one London, one Malvinas, you know, neurohypnosis of Yoko Ono's Jeffin Corporation, who installationed Obama after they took out the brains of our society with the assassination of the Kennedys. So when I say we live in a time for greatness, what I'm saying is we need to differentiate between the two colors movements, the two notions of equity, and put a stop to their ethical genocide. Because the idea that we bring life meaning that's so popular at UW Dialectical is the opposite of intelligent design. Intelligent design means that there's a climate stasis in which the human race can explore, heal the earth, and nourish one another. And then there's this idea that we bring meaning to the earth. So what we'll do is we'll build an ark, and the ark will take out the people who are unnecessary. You know, we don't need that mentality. We don't need throwbacks to the age of the great dictators. I wasn't alive at the time of the great dictators, but my parents were. I understand that this Texas school book comes as a hand me down document from the Axis. So we have colors and equity, which is democratic safety net, and we have the arc of colors, which is the old Axis trickery back at work, yeah, for the millennium of the God help us all. Fuck that.